Science fiction, the great teacher, the great inspiration. It helps us see the endless possibilities of life. So let's be inspired together.
We are all explorers, driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores.
Sending out interceptors. We have taken them completely by surprise.
Hi guys, it's Commodore Jeff. Hope everybody's doing okay. From now on, what I'm going to be doing in my videos, both on Trekker Critique and Ordinary Talk, is I'm going to place a date in which I recorded the video, because I've been getting some response that people seem to, always think, oh, well, you're behind, what's going on currently. And, because I record it, edit it, and re-edit it, and then post it, by the time I get all that done, it's already too late to meet up with what's going on currently. So my videos mostly have been behind the time. So from now on, I'm going to place a date in the description, I guess, when I post the videos of when I recorded what date I recorded the video on, so that way people will notice when I recorded it what was going on at that time. It seems to be a lot easier than simply kind of explaining every time or answering the same question over and over again. Okay, so I want to talk about episode 3 of Strange New Worlds. And I watched it last night, finally. I watched it. I was busy doing some other things, and I finally got time to sit down and watch it, so I did. And it was very good. So was episode 2, by the way, which was on before that. I didn't make any feedback on it, but I did like that second episode too. Episode 3. We get to find out a little bit more about number 1 and Dr. Mbenga. And I have to say, I was kind of surprised that, we find out that the doctor has been secretly keeping his daughter in a transporter buffer in sickbay because, she's sick and they don't have a cure yet for her. So the only way to keep her alive long enough until they do that is to keep her in the stasis, as it were, in the transporter buffer. Now, I was thinking, for a lot of, later in many of the Star Trek episodes we saw, okay, now I realized this idea did not happen until the episode Relics came out in TNG, and that's when we were introduced to being able to put people in buffers for extended periods of time, okay? And it wasn't until then. But I'm thinking, in the future, even past the 24th century, maybe that's what they'll do with a lot of people that are sick and they can't find a cure for. They'll just, instead of cryogenics like we know today or something, what we'll do is they'll transport them into a buffer and leave them dematerialized until such time as they can be reconstituted and then given the cure. Certainly there was a lot of episodes in Deep Space Nine or Voyager and stuff where they could have done that and possibly saved some people. So it seems like, maybe they, ought to make that sort of a norm. I mean, why should people secretly have to do something like that, especially for a doctor, if he feels that there's a chance they could save that life later by preserving them inside of a buffer or a transporter buffer. So I think they ought to, that idea really should be expanded on. Maybe not on Strange New Worlds because this is 23rd century, but maybe in like later episodes of Discovery or something like that, where maybe that technology has been perfected to the point where it's normal to do just that, to keep people suspended animation inside of a buffer. So I think that that's an idea. But certainly it's something that if we're to assume that Strange New Worlds is canon, which I'm assuming to this point so far that it is, okay, at least story-wise. I mean, visually no, but story-wise maybe we can say that that's part of the canon, okay? How you want to imagine the Enterprise and all that, that's up to you, but we'll just say for argument's sake that it is canon. And so Dr. M'Benga obviously made an interesting, innovative thing. Maybe he was the first one to come up with the idea, and maybe Scotty didn't know about it, but he kind of come up with the idea himself too when he was crashed on the Dyson sphere in the Jenolan. Maybe, like I say, like people say, when you're in dire situations, you become very inventive in order to stay alive, and maybe that's what it took for Scotty to realize that, yeah, we can do this, So maybe Dr. M'Benga was the first one to do this, or I don't know. I was going to say maybe Scotty got the idea from Dr. M'Benga, but I don't know. I can't remember exactly the story how it went with relics. If he just came up with the idea, or he remembered it. Dr. M'Benga using that, and maybe he decided to recreate that on the Jenolan. I don't know. That can be debated, I guess, later on. I'm not going to say that what Dr. M'Benga did, in the episode was like contrary to canon. Okay, you can easily explain it away in Star Trek lore. Okay, so I'm not going to, I don't feel like it's really that big of an issue, personally. I think it's a surprise that a doctor would come up with the idea on his own, but, maybe this, doctor's got more of a background in, transporter technology than we realize. So, I thought that was pretty neat. But the fact that he was doing this and he didn't tell anybody on the ship that he was doing it, I'm like, well, what would be the problem if they did know? I mean, let me put it like this. If Dr. M'Benga really had this problem with his daughter, why would he bring her on the starship, in the buffer on the starship? Wouldn't it be better if he was on a space station or a special medical facility on a planet to be able to work this problem out? Why would he bring his sick daughter onto the Enterprise where anything could happen? I mean, what if the transporters get damaged? Okay, they're in some kind of a fight and the transporter gets damaged and he loses the daughter. That won't happen if he's on a planet somewhere where he can work on this medical problem. And to me, it seemed more practical, in my view, that he would not take her on the Enterprise, that he would have her on a planetoid or somewhere, or there's a more extensive medical community where he could work on this problem and have a greater chance of curing her. So, I mean, I'm not sure how much chance he's going to get working on the Enterprise and being able to try to work on his daughter's problem. Like I said, she may never come out of that buffer, because who knows where the Enterprise will be from one minute to the next. So it's a risky thing that he's doing. I don't think I would have done it that way, but the writers, I guess, felt differently. As for number one, her being an Alarian or something, what the hell is, I can't remember the name of it. She's another alien race, and somebody, people, the two guys on Trek Yards had brought up the fact that this name of this race was used before on Enterprise, and they're trying to connect the two alien races together to suggest that perhaps because these people or this alien race manages to change itself to fit their environment instead of trying to change the environment to fit them, that maybe the aliens in a different form on Enterprise were those on that ship that Archer had to steal their warp coil from in order to get the Enterprise to go back to warp again. Okay, so somehow they managed to get into Starfleet by making themselves appear to look human. Okay, and Una, which means one. Wow, they call her Una. That's another word for one. So number one is essentially not human. Okay, but she's, you know, from another alien race, which we assume we've met before on Enterprise. Okay, so I mean, because the world that they go to is not the home world of this race. It's a colony for this race. Okay, so there's the home world we haven't seen yet. So maybe we'll see more of them later on in the show, especially since they're carrying around one of their race as first officer. Maybe at some point we'll get to see the actual home world of this and can get more information in order to make our assessment as to who this race is, and if they were connected to the one we've heard on Enterprise in season 3, was it? Yeah, season 3. But sometimes I guess they feel like maybe they also didn't know that the name was already used, and they might have made a mistake and used that name, not thinking that, oh, somebody used it already on another Star Trek episode, or maybe they did it deliberately. I don't know. But when we get more information from it in another episode or something in some way, then maybe we can draw that connection or simply explain it away as a mistake by the writers or something like that. Who knows? So the episode, like I said, it also introduced the other backstory. I think I can't remember her name now, but she was acting first officer until they got their number one back. That she's got some, a little bit of genetic engineering herself. Okay. And even though the only one we've ever were exposed to in Starfleet was Dr. Bashir, we have another one now who's secretly on the Enterprise trying to hide her background. Okay, so we saw how harshly Starfleet was about that in the 24th century. My guess is they're going to be even more strict about it in the 23rd century, 100 years before. Okay, if they find out there's somebody on the Enterprise that's there and shouldn't be there because of her background. But it seems to me like as of late, we've been sort of, Star Trek has been kind of tap dancing around the issue about whether or not Starfleet is really doing the right thing by getting all pissy about somebody that's been genetically engineered, because as we saw in Dr. Bashir's case, his problem was that he was born dysfunctional, okay, mentally dysfunctional, and they had to use genetic alteration in order to fix what was wrong with him, essentially. Otherwise, he would have never been, able to do anything, through much of his life. So I'm wondering, if certain special dispensation or something like that would be granted and supervised by experts on whether or not a person should have this done. Apparently it's done in back alleys, sort of like, the way, abortions were before Roe versus Wade. That maybe these people are getting alterations in back alleys, which is not a good thing, because if you're dealing with something as sophisticated as that, you want the best minds working on it, and not some fly-by-night outfit that's working behind the scenes making genetically engineered people. Okay, because if they're so scared about recreating the mess that led up to World War III, they certainly aren't going to let that happen again. Okay, so I think that's going to be an interesting aspect to kind of explore with this character here. So as far as I can tell, I mean, there was the story was pretty good. The main plot being that light somehow was making people sick, or making them crazy. And when you shut the light off, they kind of feel like they're losing their energy. It's an infection, which was a kind of a new thing, but like once again, the Enterprise is a plague ship. It's always, the crew is always getting sick, all the time on the Enterprise, no matter which Enterprise you're on here. I mean, it's like always something happens where the buffers don't work right, or the virus is too sophisticated, and you know what I'm saying. So once again, the crew of the Enterprise gets all sick and everything, and they got to figure out a cure. And so it was a pretty creative story, but it's one that's been told many times. And I think the more interesting story really was more about what was happening with the characters themselves, the ones that they were focusing on in this episode, because they're starting to build some interesting backstory. Now, somebody online got pissed and said, "Oh, you've damaged number one permanently," and I'm thinking, what? It's like, how many times have we seen number one before Strange New Worlds came out? She was only in one episode, The Cage. That was it. That's all we know about her. So as far as I'm concerned, she's free game to build on. Okay, what Majel Barrett created in that one episode was just the foundation. But we never got no backstory from her. We don't really know her. Okay, except that she was the captain's first officer. We don't really know her. But I think over the years, people kind of built their own interpretation of number one, and when somebody else comes around and they create their own, put theirs on it, they feel offended because for years they walked around thinking this is who she is, this is what she is, probably because they read some books, Star Trek books, which are non-canon. People, you need to remember, when you read a Star Trek novel, unless it says otherwise, it is not canon. It's a, what do they call it, B canon, beta canon, or whatever the hell it is, but it's just thought juice is all it is. Okay, it doesn't matter in the Star Trek lore. Okay, it ain't like Star Wars. Okay, so you got to remember, when the stories you read, and this is why I would never write any Star Trek novel. Okay, because if anything I write, they'll immediately disavow, and it won't even be part of canon. So screw them. Okay, if that's how they want to treat authors who write books and stuff based on their material, then to hell with them. But this is why I wouldn't write for them, is because you might have a brilliant idea for a character on the show, but it's going to get rejected no matter how good it is, which I think is probably one of the reasons why the late Harlan Ellison had such a fit about the franchise, is because he was a guy who could come up with some great ideas. Okay, and all his ideas get shot down because he's trying to write something for television, and television, is very strict on, well, at least it was in his day, very strict on what they allowed on the TV. Okay, but he had some good ideas. Now, instead of just writing a book and trying to get them to canonize it for the series, he writes the book and he wants to put it as is on the screen. That was never going to happen. Okay, but he certainly could have made the argument to Gene Roddenberry to say, look, can we make this story part of the Star Trek saga? Okay, can it be part of it? And fight the battle on that regard. That way, this thing, wouldn't have made such a big thing in his mind. Okay, but I think at some point people really need to go back to Paramount and say, look, we got to address this. You go to any bookstore in America and there's going to be tons and tons and tons of Star Trek material, more than anything that we've ever built or created for TV or anime, whatever. There's they're swamped with Star Trek novels, but we won't acknowledge all that work. Okay, and there's some great work in there, and maybe we ought to think about introducing some of that into the show. Try to canonize some of that work, because we can't reject every fucking book that's written. I mean, what if Shakespeare wrote a fucking Star Trek novel? Okay, wouldn't it irk you if they wouldn't canonize that as part of the series? Of course it would. The greatest writer in history, and they would turn around and say, no, that's all going to be part of it. Talk about arrogant. Okay, I'm sorry, but if the writers have a good idea, they should acknowledge it or not acknowledge it, depending on how they think the canon should go. Okay, but if all the boats were sailing in the same direction, which I see in all these novels that they write for Star Trek, then there should not be a problem with canonizing these stories, because the people who write this stuff themselves already know in their heads what is and what doesn't go. Okay, look, if they're going to take something like the animated series, TAS, okay, not the new animated stuff they're doing now, but the older stuff, they still haven't decided, okay, in some way, or whether or not that stuff is actually part of Star Trek canon. Fans, there's certain, I guess it depends on the fan you ask. If you ask me, it is. When you get the original actors and the creator and the writers behind a cartoon of Star Trek, then it has to be canon. Okay, you can't get any more canon than that. Okay, yeah. Even though the story might be goofy, it's still part of it. Okay, we certainly had some goofy live-action Star Treks in our time. Okay, so I think that it should be allowed. And in that case, maybe it's time to sit down and go through all the novels and stuff that's been written over the years, and ask ourselves, should these things be canonized? Maybe they'll have to go through these books one by one to find out which seem to fit the timeline and which doesn't. Okay, and these writers deserve some recognition. Okay, maybe that's why a lot of writers don't want to write for Star Trek on TV or something like that, because they figure that Paramount's been pissing on authors for years, except for the ones that work for them. They've been pissing on writers for years who've come up with incredible stories of Star Trek stories, but they never get much recognition. You never hear about, #1 on New York Times bestseller. You never hear about stuff like that. You don't hear about a Star Trek novel that's selling like hotcakes somewhere. Okay, who the hell ever hears of it? We just have to keep checking our bookstore every week to see if there's anything new on the shelf. But most of the time, we don't know. We just don't fucking know. Okay? So I think, Paramount really needs to stop with this damn bullshit with the writers, and start, injecting some brain juice here into the series here, and let these people bring their ideas to fruition. Okay? Because it's only going to help. It's not going to hurt anything. Okay? All right. So. Let's take a little bit.
Mentos fresh and full of life. Nothing gets to you. Staying fresh, staying cool. With Mentos fresh and full of life. Fresh goes better. Mentos freshness. Fresh goes better with Mentos fresh and full of life.
Mentos, the fresh.
Little cinnamon gum freshens breath longer than Big Red.
So kiss a little longer, stay close a little longer, hold tight a little longer, longer with Big Red. That Big Red freshness lasts right through it. Your fresh red goes on and on. While you chew it, say goodbye a little longer, make it last a little longer. Give your breath long-lasting freshness with Big Red.
and you sure can pick 'em. It's that big cornflakes crunch. Hey kid, you really know what you like, and you sure can pick 'em, sure can pick 'em. It's cornflakes, alright.
Some people have a deep, abiding respect for the natural beauty that was once this country. And some people don't. People start pollution. People can stop it. Write for Pollution Booklet, Box 1771, Radio City Station, New York.
Be a part of the entertainment value of a lifetime.
I loved it. It was the best performance I've seen in a lifetime.
I loved the show. I liked it very much. He's a very entertaining man. It's well worth the money.
Now appearing in Charlottetown, coming to Halifax November 6th to the 18th, and St. John November 20th through the 26th.
All right, everybody, welcome back. So, as I was saying, got a little bit off track. People were kind of upset about, you know, number one being developed the way she is. And I'm saying I don't have a problem with it because as far as Star Trek goes, what's on TV or on the movie screen is considered canon. So in that case, we don't know anything about number one. Okay? We didn't even know her real name. They had to make that up. Okay? And it's not because of Majel Barrett as an actress. She was given a role, she did a role, but her character wasn't prominent in the show. So the attention was focused on Captain Pike, okay, and Vina. But, you know, we didn't really, I mean, if Spock was the only character didn't make it into the series, then that would have been all we knew about Spock at that time. We would have assumed that, you know, he was just the way he is all the time in that, right? So we didn't know anything about those characters, okay? And even after the episode is over, we still don't know too much, you know, about Captain Pike, except that later on we find out he got hurt, you know, in a really bad accident, and he's confined in a wheelchair. Okay, we don't know anything about him. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, all the characters in Star Trek The Cage, it's all free game, you know, except for Spock, obviously, because Spock continued on after that. But all the other characters on there, it's free game. They can do what they want with these characters, as far as I'm concerned, because we have no information about them. We don't know them. We never did. We were deprived of that because CBS at that time, or Desilu, whatever, whoever, said, oh, the show's too cerebral, it ain't gonna sell, okay? And so they had to make a second pilot, you know, with different actors, okay? So as far as the characters in The Cage, I mean, like I said, we abandoned them, but we don't know them. And so this was a good opportunity to bring back characters we abandoned 50 years ago, okay, and basically flesh them out more, let us to get to know them more, okay? And yes, I realize they're all different actors and all that, okay, and maybe the same actors back then would have different takes on them if they were doing it today. Okay, that's, you know, what are you going to do? Okay, 50 years, people. You can't possibly dig these people out of the grave and have them come back. I mean, there's you know, so you're just going to have to accept it the way they're doing it now. I mean, sometimes people don't come to the realization, you know, that there's something they can change, you know, too late. But now's the chance that we can do something with these characters and just basically start over with a clean slate with a lot of them and build them from there. Okay, so if you don't like what they're doing with number one or any of the other characters on the show, you know, too bad. Okay, because like I said, you know, aside from Uhura and Spock, okay, and really Uhura, we don't really know what she was like as young Uhura, because she wasn't actually in the cage, okay, in that episode, so we don't know what Uhura was like when she was just a cadet, which, being a cadet and serving active duty is like, okay, that's questionable, because I don't think they would actually throw a cadet on a starship when she still is a cadet. You know, when you're a cadet, you're basically still in training, and yet they already tossed her on board the Enterprise, so that was a bit, that's debatable there as to whether or not that's actually allowed. But anyway, young Uhura is interesting because we'll see her develop into the Uhura we know through this series. So we got to see her on her first away mission, which is actually supposed to be called a landing party. They didn't start using the term away mission until Star Trek The Next Generation. Okay, so they need to correct themselves on that. Anytime a group of people beam down on a planet, it's a landing party. Okay? That's what they called them back then. And oh yes, and I mentioned this to a friend. The ship's computer doesn't have a voice that sounds like it has personality. That only began in Star Trek The Next Generation. The Majel Barrett computer voice should be working. This information is not, you know what I'm saying? That's how the computer sounded in TOS. Instead, they give it, you know, a voice that sounds like it's from TNG, but it's not that. The voice is not that sophisticated, or at least it shouldn't be. And they don't have an ops station on the bridge either. Okay, ops was another invention from Star Trek The Next Generation. That was the station that Data sat at. It's basically a control station that monitors all the ship's functions. Okay, it's sort of like the engineering console on the bridge, only they integrate that with life support, with the main computer systems, you know, everything there, so that can be monitored and watched and corrected, you know, especially in a tactical operation. It comes in handy to be able to isolate problems where they are, and you know, and send repair teams accordingly. But they didn't have that back in the 23rd century. That was all divided out into all the stations that are around the bridge. Okay, that's just why you got so many more control panels. Okay, so yeah, there is no ops station, and I heard Captain Pike use that term ops on there, and you know, it's little things like that, you know, and of course the writers today, who are probably younger than I am, wouldn't even know that, because they probably never saw or really saw any of the TOS. They probably watched maybe some of the TNG episodes, and the terminologies they use on TNG are still stuck in their head, and so they're writing these stories and they're using terminology that is not era specific. Okay, they've kind of lost that side of that, so you know, they need to go and reread the Star Trek Bible, as it were, and find out what how things were said back in the 23rd century in order for the lines to sound correct for the time period. Certainly the use of the word circuits is not going to be something you would you would want to add in there. Okay, I mean, even in TOS, when somebody would scream out, "Check the circuits," I mean, that's 20th century lingo there, so they, you know, they had that out of whack. All right, starships, they don't have circuits. Okay, the ships they function differently. They use a whole different, what is it, the translator they call it or something. I mean, they got all different kinds of gadgets now that, I mean, back, you know, in the 23rd century, that use it to make up their control systems. Okay, you know, circuits are just it's more than just the parts that are in a TV set. You know, picture tubes and shit like that aren't going to be in there, you know. Okay. But, you know, there is a lingo that's used in the 23rd century. They should familiarize themselves with it. Oh, and yeomans. Where are the yeomans? Yeomans were a big thing in TOS, even in the movies. Okay. The yeomans, they bring the captain fuel consumption reports, and they bring coffee, snacks, or whatever the hell the captain needs. There's more like the caterer to the captain on the ship. Okay. And I haven't seen any yeomans yet on Strange New Worlds, but they really ought to have them pop in there, even if they're just background characters, handing Pike something to sign and all that. You know, that's important too, because that was a big part of TOS. You know, during their mission, they would always have, you know, you'd see Kirk sitting there signing something on a big clipboard-looking thing, and hand it to the yeoman, and they would take it away somewhere. So that's important, I think, to try to bring that in there. Certainly opens the door for other characters. And even in the Cage, you had a yeoman who seemed fresh out of the academy, and the captain seemed to have a problem with a female yeoman on the bridge. So certainly there was a mention of a yeoman even in the Cage. So there you go. Got to have it there too, right? To be consistent. So yes, it was a good story overall, and you know, my brain when I'm watching one of these Star Trek episodes is running at a mile a minute, you know, because it's just you know, I hear everything, you know, and and it's like my brain is like a damn computer just calculating everything that's being said and everything. I mean, that's what happens when you spend so much of your life watching the show. You sort of formulate your brain around it, so that way it's all understandable, and you expect it to kind of be consistent. Otherwise, it screws up your brain, you know, and the reasoning behind the things you're watching. So you know what I'm saying. So it's really important, I think, you know, like I said, for them to kind of maintain consistency for the fans themselves, so that way, you know, people won't be so focused on, oh, they screwed that up, or oh, they don't. So I've already kind of laid to rest the argument that they're ever going to make the bridge look like the original bridge. That's obviously not going to happen. So I'm just going to contend with the fact that that's something that's going to be, and I'll just have to live with it, you know, for the sake of watching something Star Trek. You know, that's just how it is. They're never going to change that. It's always going to look like, you know, black and, you know, whatever. It's going to look dark and dingy, you know, depressing, black and all. Certainly doesn't go with the uniforms that they're wearing. Okay, you know, the colors are obviously going to be something that it's going to look better if the bridge has a little bit more brightness to it. You know, that's just my opinion on it. Anyway, that's it I wanted to talk about here for today. So if you have any comments or any ideas or things you want to ask me, please go ahead and write them and subscribe. And I will see you all again soon. So take care, everybody.
Driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores.
We are not sending out interceptors. We have taken them completely by surprise.
Because I think that the tradition of an engineer is a Scot. You know, because all the great motor ships and the steamships of the world were built in the Clyde.